Hello, everyone. I am your host, Alejandro Colindres. Welcome to Series 2 of the podcast, The Road to Champagne, 13 Tested Principles to Drive Your Career to Success. This podcast series will benefit professionals that have room for growth in their career, especially young professionals. In Series 2, we are talking to professionals with brilliant careers in different stages of their journey to find out how the 13 principles have helped them. You can see the framework of the 13 principles in the website roadtochampagne.com. Hello, everyone. I am excited about Series 2, and I hope you are too. Talking to each guest about their journey is proving to be very insightful. Like I said, our journeys are all different, but the success principles are not. In my perspective, it is the effective application of each principle that helps us maximize the probability of success in our journey. Cliff was not predestined to be a senior vice president and COO. My next guest was not predestined to become a chief supply chain officer. They just made the right choices, the right sacrifices, took advantage of the right opportunities, and put the right amount of effort to apply the 13 principles proficiently in their career. That's the key lesson for us. We are in control of our journey, and knowing which principle to apply will make a significant and visible difference in your life. Like I said before, don't take it from me. Take it from the diverse guests that are giving you advice. I am very excited to be joined by Chris Callieri. Chris is the Chief Supply Chain Officer for Tory Burch. He has held several senior positions in consumer goods companies, including Adidas, and as a partner at Kearney, a top management consulting firm. That is actually where we met a couple of decades ago. He studied biology at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, obtained a master's in environmental management at Cambridge in the UK, and at MBA from Cornell Johnson Graduate School of Management. When not busy at work or with family, you can find Chris at a golf course perfecting his game. Chris is originally from Chile. Chris, welcome to the Road to Champagne podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Alejandro. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Thank you for joining me. Yes, it's been a long time. So Chris, tell us a little bit about your career. Where did it start? How did it evolve? And where are you now?
My career started in environmental consulting. I joined a company called Environmental Resources Management out of their London office. And this was when I had just finished my studies at Cambridge. And it took me to Chile, which was really kind of what I was trying to do at the time. And I was doing a project for the ERM London office. And then eventually ERM actually opened an office in Chile. And I spent a couple of years, I think total about 3 years working in ERM in Chile.
Yeah.
Then I had the opportunity to come with ERM to Washington, D.C.
Great.
And it was a pretty interesting role. It was really focused in working with the multilateral agencies like the World Bank, like the Inter-American Development Bank. And my responsibility there was really networking, building relationships to try to support identifying new projects for ERM in the Latin American region.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I ended up deciding to leave ERM to go and work with one of my clients, the Inter-American Development Bank, where I spent about 9 months or so working with them before heading off to Cornell to pursue my MBA.
Great.
You know, at the time, and it was part of the reason why I wanted to get the MBA, was to sort of try to give myself opportunities to broaden my career, to have different options, if you will, outside of the path that I was in at the time. And, you know, you talk in your principles about wanting more. And I think one of my concerns, if you will, at the time was that it seemed like a lot of the work that we were doing was very much driven by companies trying to meet sort of certain minimum environmental requirements, as opposed to trying to be a little more creative, going out of the way to really look at environmental management, or today as we talk about sustainability from the point of view of a competitive advantage.
They were just trying to check the box.
In many cases, yes. In many cases, yes. And to me at the time, it just felt like it should and could be a lot more. So, you know, I was in my 20s, and, you know, I had sort of dreams of changing the world at the time. So I thought, hey, you know what, if I do an MBA, maybe I can get into industry and be sort of an influence for doing things differently.
Okay, so you weren't exactly trying to change careers. You were trying to broaden your skill set, but yet apply it to the environmental field.
That was my perspective when I went in.
Okay.
And, you know, you've been through a similar path, right? And there's times in your life where you have a concept, you have an idea, but the vision is not exactly like perfectly mapped out. So that's how it started. And what I recognized early on during my MBA was that after doing the dozens and dozens of informational interviews as you do in most of these MBA programs, that I realized that many of the tracks seemed to me to be sort of quite narrow, very sort of functionally specific. And that's what attracted me to consulting. Because again, there was this thought of being exposed to a broad range of industries, issues, and therefore having the opportunity to really engage with some of the most senior decision makers in companies in shaping answers and action plans, et cetera, against strategic questions. And I thought, what, that might actually give me some of the opportunities that I'm looking for to, have influence. But interestingly enough, towards the end of my time at A.T. Kearney, I had a chance to build what we called a sustainability practice at A.T. Kearney at the time.
Awesome.
And so that was the beginning of being able to sort of focus a little bit more on some of these topics. After leaving Kearney, I had a chance to work at Adidas for a few years. It's certainly one of my favorite brands and a company that takes sustainability very, very seriously. As an example, they were one of the brands that championed some of the work to take plastics out of the ocean in partnership with an initiative called Parlay for the Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And so working at Adidas and having the opportunity to be in a brand that stands for sustainability in many ways was exciting. And then most recently at Tory Burch, I've been very involved in working in the company on these topics. So it started with a sort of a vision and a dream, and it took some time.
Yes.
But eventually, I find myself having the opportunity to, in my own small way, to hopefully help drive some better decision making from that kind of environmental sustainability perspective.
That's great, Chris. And I like how you identified that passion and interest. And throughout the years, you did not lose, that focus or that passion, right? That's pretty admirable. Now, of the 13 principles, which would you say are the 3 that you believe had a strong impact in your success?
Yeah, that's a really tough question, Alejandro. I had a chance to look through the 13 principles, and I have to admit I had a bit of a hard time deciding, okay, which are the 3?
Trying to prioritize, yeah.
I think they're all relevant and important, but I gravitated to 3 that I sort of felt were particularly interesting or, I thought important to what I've done. So one of them was certainly this idea of wanting more.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I consider myself sometimes to probably err on the side of being a little bit of a workaholic. And my wife certainly has reminded me of that over the years. But I always feel a sense like there's more that can be done. And I'm always curious about how to do things better. Where can you just tweak things? Where can you approach a problem from a different perspective? And so I'm always looking for different challenges and different opportunities. And one of the things that I really enjoy, I enjoy learning. Mm-hmm. And so I like to always be in a place where I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And where it's forcing you to grow and expand. And I think you talk about it in when you've talked about some of the principles, this idea of if you're not stretching yourself and if you're not putting yourself in situations where perhaps you're thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? It can put some constraints on your own growth.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, I think you have to be careful about what you take on and how you take on and, managing expectations so you can set yourself up for success. But I think that's really one of the things that I find important. When I was at Adidas, it was at a time when we were doing a lot of conversation in the company, in the leadership teams about diversity. And one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting, and for me it was a learning, was that oftentimes you tend to find a different behavior between men and women. Women sometimes stop themselves in the workplace because they focus more on what they've accomplished versus perhaps selling themselves a little bit more aggressively in terms of what they can do. Mm-hmm. And so that's a way of, holding yourself back versus, men more often won't focus on what they've done and their experience, but they'll say, oh yeah, absolutely, I can do that. And it's an interesting difference in behavior. And I just bring it up because it's one of those things where you may want more, but you may behave in certain ways that keeps you a little bit from it.
Yeah.
And certainly was a learning for me. But as we had a chance to talk about it with, lots of my colleagues and mentees and so on, it was in fact something that seemed to be true,
Yeah.
and something that, I think particularly women, but men also have to be mindful of, particularly if you're in a position where you're interviewing. Just being aware of those biases, for example, and those behaviors, it's really important to make sure that,
Yeah.
you evaluate everybody, in a really fair and objective manner.
So that's good advice. Make sure you don't really try to check all the boxes, because if you do check all the boxes, you're aspiring for the normal. And if you want to aim high, there has to be some boxes that you don't check, right?
As the father of a girl, my daughter, one of the things that I want is to make sure that she's growing up just stretching herself and not, seeing any kind of boundaries or limits to what she can do.
Awesome.
The second principle being a work in progress. To me, the way that I took that was to always recognize that you don't necessarily have all the answers, and to recognize that you can't ever sort of stop asking questions, because, there's always a new way. There's always somebody who's got a great idea that nobody's thought of. And it's just, it creates a mindset that if you think of yourself as not having all the answers and kind of being humble, if you will, in terms of that, you may actually limit not only what you can do, but the possibilities for other people in terms of what they can contribute and what they can achieve. So, I'm not sure if it was exactly sort of fully in the spirit of how it's written, but that's how that particular principle spoke to me.
It's very interrelated, right? It's about realizing that you don't know it all and that there is so much more that you can learn, and being hungry to learn more, right, about different topics.
Yeah. It was a funny anecdote that a former colleague of mine told me, and he worked in a company where moving around and sort of changing positions was very much the norm. He said that it was very humbling to him to go from position to position, because oftentimes when he was in a particular position, he always found himself thinking that the other guys just didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And when he then suddenly would take that other person's position where he thought, oh, these guys just don't have a clue, and he got a better appreciation for what were all of the other dynamics, pressures, et cetera, he realized that, things weren't so cut and dry. It wasn't like I'm right and they're wrong, right?
Yeah.
But, every situation, every job, every function, they have kind of their own dynamic, and it's usually much more complicated than that. And I think, again, it sort of relates back to this idea of being a work in progress, right? If you realize that you are and others are, you may approach things with humility.
Definitely. What about the third one, Chris?
The last one for me was about knowing yourself and seeking feedback. For me, I think that has become, frankly, more and more important as I've taken on more of a leadership or managerial position where I have several direct reports and so on. And I'm always trying to understand from them how my conversations, how my comments, how my behaviors, how are they perceived? Because sometimes I find that there is a difference between intent and how it's received. Oftentimes you say something and you don't really mean it with a particular intent, but it could be received in perhaps a negative way.
Yeah.
Maybe you sort of cut somebody off and you said, hey, let's do this, and it came across as abrupt, but you were just trying to be efficient. Like you actually understood exactly what they were saying and you just went straight to the answer. But in doing so, you took away, perhaps in some cases you actually came to the wrong conclusion, but in some cases you just took away the opportunity for that person to sort of walk you through their thinking and so on and so forth. And that's a perfect instance where the intent was very different from how it was received and the impact that it had in that individual.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm constantly trying to better understand myself, better understand how I come across. And while I like some of these different assessments, whether it's DISC or Hogan or others, I find that, for me at least, oftentimes the most helpful are just the points of feedback that you get out of conversation with either, your team members or colleagues and so on. So I think that's really important. And it helps you to be more effective.
Great, Chris. So let me ask you the flip side. Which of the 13 principles did not or do not come naturally, perhaps forcing you to put extra effort and attention to them? How have you improved?
As I read the principle around power and influence, I think that was one of the ones that struck me that it often has been somewhat challenging, perhaps. Some of us are just very kind of results oriented. And you tend to focus on the problem. You tend to focus on what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And you make a couple of really bad assumptions in that. First of all, you assume that everybody else is seeing the issue just as you are, or that everybody has the same appreciation for the facts as you do.
Yeah.
And you forget that people may be looking at it from a totally different perspective. People may have different objectives. If you ignore that human dimension to really understand how everybody's thinking about it, you will lose some of your effectiveness. Much of what you do is not necessarily because you have the authority to, but it's about how do you collaborate and partner and influence others. That human element is super important. Sometimes it's easy to sort of forget or put a little less emphasis on it. So for me, that's one of the things that I'm constantly trying to work at. I try to be very mindful about it.
As you should, right? Because like you said, you could focus too much on the problem and getting to the right solution. And then you have an awesome solution and you think you're done, right? But if you don't convince the right people that is the right solution for that problem, it might not get implemented. And, your wonderful exercise of getting to that right solution became fruitless, right? If it wasn't implemented, the problem is not going to be effectively solved.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think most of your principles, maybe not all, but I think most of them, like anything, it's a spectrum and they're all sort of a journey, right? There's no such thing as, mastering one completely.
Yeah.
I think many of them are all about sort of a work in progress if you get, against each of those dimensions. So
correct.
I think it's not about binary of either you do it or you don't do it. It's about how good are you at exercising that particular principle.
Definitely. And the way I would look at it, Chris, for these principles, you might think you're pretty good at the principle at that point in time. But if you move on to the next job, the next, company, you might realize, oh man, I got to get better at this because, the dynamics here require a higher level of proficiency in that principle.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you constantly have to sort of adjust and exercise different ways of going about things. I was talking with a colleague. We were talking about this concept of having elasticity to your style. I think we're all a work in progress, and it's important to keep thinking about how do you expand? How do you get better?
Yeah.
And sometimes you see some people that are just incredible at influencing and engaging. And it's kind of like watching an Olympic athlete doing what they do. And it's it seems so easy, but I'm pretty sure there was a lot of practice and time spent refining that skill, and it's important to recognize.
For sure. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you 2 random questions from the 13 principles. Let me start with principle number 3, always be WIP or work in progress. Can you share a story of how being a continuous learner brought you significant unexpected benefits?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll answer with a more personal example than a work-related one.
Of course.
Golf for me was one of those. And when I took up the game of golf and I was still pretty young, I remember I was at the driving range with my sister, who's 4 years younger than I am. And we were just in the range hitting balls. We never had a lesson. And the golf pro was watching, and he came over to me and said, hey, are your parents at the club? And I said, yeah. He said, go and get them. So I run off to get them. And of course, in my imagination, I'm thinking that he saw me and that I was having this great talent and whatever. So I bring my dad over. And the golf coach says, you know what? I've been watching your kids, and your daughter has incredible talent. I want to coach her. He did not say a single thing about my golf game. And at that day, I was like, okay, I was determined to get better.
You were traumatized.
I was traumatized. anyhow, the nice thing about it is that, it's a game that's constantly challenging you, and I'm always trying to practice and get better. But the nice thing about it is that the more the effort and practice that I put on it, golf for me has become just this incredible part of my life, which first of all has allowed me to meet some really amazing people and to forge some incredible friendships, none of which I ever thought I would be doing by playing golf. To me, it was just about the competitiveness of it, wanting to master it.
Yeah.
The other thing about it is that it has taught me patience, which did not naturally come to me. And so it's taught me lessons about how to be a better father, how to, I think, be a better colleague. So in many ways, it's something that I put a lot of work into over the years, obviously because I enjoy it and it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really about mastering a game that I continue to not be quite mastering, but I keep trying more and more. And certainly, I think over the past couple of decades, my handicap has been going in the wrong direction.
Are you better than your sister now?
Well, only because she stopped.
Okay.
I think if she had kept it up, she would probably still beat me. But, it's just one of those things where, it was something that you did and it just brought you all of these other opportunities and great things that you never really would have expected to have.
That's great. And, one good point, Chris, is that always being a learner is not just about topics that are related to your job. It's about topics that are personal, hobbies, things that you want to just explore because you're curious what they are. So that's a very good example, right? I'm glad your answer was not just, work related. So on principle 11, build your village. What role has your network played in your career, Chris?
I can't even begin to describe how important it has been for the both of us working in consulting. That was all about your network. Otherwise, you were kind of dependent on the placing manager to slot you in a project where you might end up working with people that you never know, or you might end up in a situation that, was going to turn out to be not the best of projects, or, having that network and putting the effort into continuing to build it and maintain it while we were in consulting, and I'm sure you felt the same way, was a great asset. Mm-hmm. And so for many of us that nurtured some of those networks, it just meant that, you kind of went from thing to thing and you were in some great projects and met some great people and had a chance to actually be working with folks that you liked and enjoyed. My network has also played an important role in just finding new opportunities where friends have said, hey, I got a call from a headhunter. I thought this could be interesting for you. And they put me in touch. And next thing you know, you have a great opportunity.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I always mention when asked is, should you take calls from headhunters all the time, even if it's not necessarily, a role that you might be super interested in? And again, I look at it as an opportunity to build a network, to make a new contact. Yeah. It might not be the role for me, but I might have a friend or somebody that I know that could be a great fit, and and I'll
who would benefit, right? So it becomes a win-win. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'll share the contact. My network also has been, really important in helping me find people for my team. Mm-hmm. I think the network has been really important in my career in, all sorts of different ways. And whenever I can, I try to do what I can, to provide a reference or to provide some guidance, point them in the right direction, or maybe make an introduction.
Yeah. Now that you are a very senior guy, you still have a group of mentors, perhaps a sponsor, that are, giving you guidance and advice.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, but there's a few people that I reach out to when I have, questions and I might be stuck with something, or, I'm facing a situation that I haven't quite faced and I'm not really sure out of three alternatives, which one is maybe the one to go for. So I still have those relationships where I reach out. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the time is just about having somebody asking you thoughtful questions.
Yeah.
That sometimes help you to see things from a different perspective. Yeah, no, I think mentors are essential.
Yeah. And I love your answer, Chris, because it shows that no matter where you are on your journey, you always need to be humble enough to ask for guidance from others, right? You cannot say, oh, now I'm in this stage of my career, I can do this by myself, I don't need other people's advice. You always need external perspectives that are seeing things from a different angle that, when you put together that advice can help you to, a better path or a better decision.
Also, mentors come in lots of different varieties, if you will. I think oftentimes when you think mentor, you typically kind of look up somebody that's more senior to you or who has more experience. And I actually think sometimes, you need to look at perhaps more junior people in your organization who have been brought up in a completely different way, who have a completely different set of perspectives or values and so on. And, it goes back a little bit to not totally, but to some degree to the feedback conversation we were having earlier. Having more junior people in the organization give you perspective and give you advice and help you understand what they're seeing as important or relevant. That's incredibly helpful, particularly if you are in a position where you have to communicate and you have to sort of story tell. It's so important to kind of get that different level of feedback. So to anybody that might listen to your podcast, I encourage them to think about mentoring in lots of different ways. Don't think about it just in that sort of typical way of, oh, it's somebody more senior. No, they come in all sorts of forms and roles.
Definitely.
And my wife has been a great mentor to me, as an example, because she sees a very different part of me. And some of the advice that she's given me over the years has been some of the best advice that I've gotten.
Excellent. So, Chris, I'm now going to pass the mic on to you and let you ask me a question.
Yeah, Alejandro. So the question I had for you is, you talk about sort of the road to Champagne as a way to drive career success. Well, my question to you is, does everybody define success in the same way, or can success be totally different things to different people? And if the answer is yes, does that impact the principles in any way or not?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. In my book, I don't even get to chapter 1. In the introduction, I start talking about the definition of success, just to be clear up front, right? At least what is my definition? Because I think if you ask 20 people, you're going to get 20 different responses, right? For me, Chris, being successful is when 5 elements intersect. And these are when you enjoy what you do, when you are great at it, when you love where you do it, meaning your team, the company that you work for, or the organization that you're part of, you love where you live, and you also enjoy financial freedom. So I think, the monetary aspect is there, but I want to purposely kind of dilute it with other aspects that lead to a well-balanced life where you feel satisfied, you feel engaged, other people appreciate your work, and you love, everything. You love where you live, where you work. I've been in situations in my career where I have lived in places where I don't want to live. It's too cold for me. I'm a tropical guy. I've been in companies where I knew that I could be there and be successful there, but only for a short amount of time. It wasn't a place where I could be there for the long term for multiple reasons, the work-life balance or whatever. It doesn't mean that I am successful now and I give up, everything is cruise control. No, I am successful in this stage of my career, but what's coming next, right? That's where the want more comes in. So it's about, okay, how do I increase, my leadership, my scope, my exposure to other topics, my knowledge, right? And that could lead to future opportunities, within the company, outside the company, maybe in a different industry, I don't know, maybe in a different country, whatever. It depends on the person, right? The principles, Chris, actually do apply to whatever definition you have of success, if it's somewhat aligned to this, right? If it's about, hey, I'm here in my career, but I want to go further, the principles will help you get there. So if you do these 3 parts of the framework well, in other words, the 13 principles, you're eliminating all of those roadblocks that could slow you to get to where you want to get. If you're in a profession trying to grow, definitely these 13 principles will help you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I like that answer. I like the fact that you spoke about being happy, is important, because I think that's almost like a precondition, right? Because if you're not happy, some of the other things are not going to be working, because somehow that energy translates. So, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And even if you say, yeah, Alejandro, I agree with your definition of success, there is room for personalizing it. For example, how do you define financial freedom? I mean, to me, Chris, maybe it's retiring earlier than, the normal age and retiring very comfortably. For somebody else, it could be, hey, I want to put my 5 kids into great schools. Maybe that's an indication of financial freedom. So even within that framework, there's some aspects of subjectivity, right? But I think when those 5 elements come together according to how you define them, then that's a great measure of success.
Got it.
So Chris, each of our audience members is on their journey to success, trying to get to their champagne. What advice can you offer them so that they can have a more efficient drive to success?
Pretend like you are like Steve Jobs and just imagine the future, regardless of how crazy it might sound, or it might seem, or it might appear. Because I think if you have a bold vision and you visualize it, it'll help you to, make it happen, to make it a reality. So I think visualizing is super important.
Chris Callieri, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing how these powerful principles have helped you in your awesome journey. It was really fun catching up. And everyone, you can contact Chris via LinkedIn. Remember, everybody, you can and must take action to start unlocking the power of the 13 principles in your life. Let's meet again in the next episode. I have another inspiring guest for you. Thanks for joining me. Cheers to a more efficient journey on your road to champagne. Hey, if you missed Series 1, I encourage you to listen to it. It explains the foundational principles we are discussing in Series 2. Like this episode? Please share it with your friends, colleagues, and classmates, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to visit roadtochampagne.com and join our mailing list, and to follow Road to Champagne on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.